All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. In case you're not sure you're in the right place, this is GrTS, graduate training series. So hopefully you're here for that. If you're only here for the food, it's okay, maybe you'll learn something anyway. My name is Richard Inouye. I used to be an Associate Vice President for Research and Associate Dean of the graduate school, and as of Monday, I'm no longer those things. So the graduate school has been picked up and moved administratively to the provost office, so now I'm in the provost office instead, but still doing very much the same sorts of things. So if you have questions or issues or concerns or problems with your graduate program, I'm one of the people you can come and talk to. My office is in Wayne, and my door is usually open, so feel free to come by. A couple of announcements before we start. Our next GrTS event is February 20th. The topic for that is tips for effective data visualization. How many of you are doing it? Probably most of you. Okay. So data visualization is just means how do you make your data both look good but also understandable? How do you present your data in ways that other people, either in your field or out of your field, can actually understand the message that you're trying to convey with your data? So that's very important. How many of you have been to one of the grad student socials? You? Okay. The next one of those will be March 21st. It will be at the Logan Country Club. I'm not sure who's hosting that, which college. But that may be the last one for the year. So if it's not, it's the next to the last. Take advantage of those. It's an opportunity to meet with graduate students, not just from your department, from your program, but from students across campus in a very informal setting. We provide some food, and sometimes there's live music, sometimes there have been things like trivia games, sometimes there's been other sorts of things, activities, but it's an opportunity to get away from your desk, away from your lab, away from your cubicle, and take a break and talk to some folks. So I encourage you to look for those. You can RSVP for those on the graduate school website, same way you can for GrTS things. So today's presenter, an important topic. Yes, how many of you hope to get how many of you plan to be students forever? How many of you plan to be students in a formal sense where you're paying tuition and enrolled in courses forever? Fewer hands, okay. So that means that probably you're going to finish up your degree and you're going to think about maybe going off and getting a job. Hopefully that's in the works for all of you. And part of that process for most jobs is going to be doing some sort of interview. And that's what this is all about. It's trying to help you learn something about how to be in an interview. As I said, the first thing to think about is don't hide in the back of the room, so it's not too late to pick up and move closer. If you want to, Brett Donna has told me she's going to prowl around the room and don't feel like you're going to be successfully hiding in the back. So our presenter today is Donna Crow, the Executive Director of Career Services here on campus. She will be discussing how to improve your interviewing skills. So
thank you so much, Richard. Could I trouble you after maybe 5 or 10 minutes to close that back door? Just want to make sure we provide everybody in. Okay, I'm super excited to spend some time with you today. I was mentioning to Abby that last year I discovered that out of students that start, well, first and foremost, how many of you are working on master's programs, master's degrees? Okay, PhD. Did you say that's half and half? Maybe a little more PhD emphasis? All right, good. That's good for me to know. Additionally, what our office and others across the country have realized that a lot of people, about 80% of people that start PhD programs intend to become faculty members. Anyone want to take a stab at what that percentage is at the end of their PhD program? 20%. So that's some challenging data, right? I'm coming to the data visualization because I'm constantly providing the president and the provost with data. So I'm always looking to improve that. So thank you for that opportunity. But there's a lot behind that. We could spend a whole other workshop, right, talking about that and why that is and what you can do to not be one of those numbers if you don't want to be one of those numbers. So today, as much as possible, I'm assuming you're going to move maybe into a research environment. But so consequently, what's behind my shoulder that you're going to be seeing are questions that we're going to work through that are around typically academia. But the hard copy of what you have in front of you is not so much that. So between the two, I think you're going to have a real good sense of the tenor and tone of what your responses should be like. And that's, as much as anything, one of the most critical things. Both my daughters are recent college grad. Well, the oldest is 4 years out now. Recent college graduates, and so they've been through a lot of interviews in the last few years. And my youngest, who just graduated in May, had an interview a couple weeks ago. She's already been working, and she's in wildlife. Anyone in wildlife? Yeah, natural resources? Yeah. So you know how those early graduates, right? They go out, they do some seasonal stuff. So she's in her, I think, her second round of seasonal. And this is the question she gets more often than any other. And the last interview, that's the only question she got. So how many of you, if I were to ask you, why should I hire you, feel like they'd have a response today, a reasonable response to that question? Well, good. Okay, a few of you feel good about it? Great. And typically, we'll get to that one. That should be a combination of your soft skills and your hard skills and your technical skills. In fact, we'll be showing you a list of skills employers are looking for. But the reason I put that up is I hope that has you a little bit frightened about the prospect of interviewing. And that's obviously why you're here today, right? But if you get that, the real message is this is something you can become good at. It isn't something you're innately good at or not good at. You can practice, you can get a lot better. So having said that, it warrants practicing these answers, writing responses, staying in front of a mirror, running them by with a roommate. All of that is critical to make sure you're as prepared as possible. And we'll just get started, but feel free to stop me anywhere along the way with questions. You're gonna have to save them to the end, okay? So I always like to start with this. Would it be helpful if this light was out, or can everybody see that screen all right? You got it? No. Is that what this is? No, that's the screen. Any idea how to turn the lights at the front down a little bit? There we go. Well, that might put us almost in. How does that work? Better? Okay, I think it might be in your guide. Not 100% sure. We try to put it in everything we print. But I might have exposed it into this one. So it is on the screen. It's on our website too. But skills employers are looking for. The reason I like to start with this is that you can see until we get to 6-1 down, analyzing quantitative data, not a lot of these skill sets, and this one in the latest data that I've looked at that just came out, this isn't even in the top 10 anymore, computer knowledge. Why do you think that is? Pardon? Yeah, because you all have it, or at least that's the assumption, right? So the reason that I like to start with this is a lot of you, as you prep for interviews, don't spend a lot of time prepping for some of the soft skill answers that you're going to need to be providing and the stories you're going to need to be sharing. Because as you'll see throughout this process, having those stories at the ready and having them really nice and succinct is part of the process. As I do mock interviews with students, probably a couple things I see just generally overarching is they don't answer the question a lot of the time, especially if it's a behavioral-based question, and we'll get to what those are in a minute. You're probably all familiar with them. I'm just going to use the terminology that's associated with them. They often don't answer the question. It's generalities and not specifics. The goal, of course, is that you're going to take the experience that you have, and it's going to transfer from the environment you've been in now to the environment you're seeking employment in. So again, if you've done really good documents as you've applied for that job, you're halfway to having prepared for the interview because you've taken some time to articulate your skills in light of the job you're applying to, not just rote listing and identifying everything that you have. So when we think about interviewing, there's work you're going to do before, there's work you're going to do in the middle during the interview, and work you're going to do after. So keep in mind that there are 3 phases to that. And we'll talk through those. So again, don't undervalue these soft skills, because the first slide you saw today said it's about skills and fit. I'm not even sure, having done this almost 31 years, I'm not even sure that skills should even be on the list. Why do I say that? Pardon?
Because you can learn.
Because you can learn skills, exactly. In fact, last semester I had a Big 4 accounting firm recruiter tell me that I don't really, I can teach an accounting, which is sacrilege. Is anyone in accounting in the room? Having said that, you only interview accounting majors. When you start to interview non-accounting majors, I'll believe them a little bit more. But the reality is, yeah, Ina Garten said it just recently. She's the Barefoot Contessa. She's a chef. I'm an Ina Garten fan. She said recently that she took her a while in her career to realize she should hire happy employees. And in her words, because I can teach them about cheese. To me, that really struck home. I had a position open recently, and I hired much more for attitude and fit. I happened to get the skills I was also looking for. Knock on wood, it isn't here yet. But yeah, it's more about those things, and it's becoming more and more about those things. So I start with this so you don't undervalue those stories. Yes, please.
What is the difference in soft and hard skills?
Yeah, good question. Soft skills are typically the things that are on this list. All those things about working in a team, planning and organizing your day, communicating effectively with others, those are typically called soft skills or intangibles. They're not that intangible. Yes. Hard skills would be all those skills associated with your research, with what you're doing, that really the reason you're in school, right? You're getting all of that. The work and other things you do outside of school sometimes are the places, oftentimes, are the places you build all those soft skills. Another question.
So I saw the other day that creativity was like top on the list on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn? Yeah, absolutely. And
And that
creativity
would be soft.
yeah, easily, absolutely. And creativity isn't just, I know a lot of people think, well, that's artistic, or, you know, all of these guides. Creativity for me is one of my strengths and high on my MBTI and all those things that you probably all heard of. For me, it isn't doing what you might think of as classically artistic things. I get to write all of our content. We're going to have a new website for our statewide association. Currently, I'm writing every landing page. To me, that's a very creative outlet for me, and I love doing it. I feel like I'm in the flow when I'm doing that kind of thing. Outstanding. Thank you for that. All right. Let's see. Okay, we're just going to start with a few questions and kind of work through them. So these behavioral-based questions, you've probably seen these before. They often start with something like, tell me about a time. Tell me about a time when you had to work with someone who was difficult to get along with. How did you do that? Tell me about a time when you trained undergraduates to work in your lab. What was that like? Those are those preliminary phrases. Next up, give me an example of. Give me an example. I don't want to steal all the ones I have coming up, but I may anyway. You know, give me an example of a curriculum you developed from scratch if you've done that yet. Has anyone done that yet? Okay. Because you want to make distinctions as well on your resume. Did you deliver someone else's created curriculum, or did you create it yourself? Those are distinctions you want to be making. What methods have you used for XYZ research, XYZ data analysis? In developing curriculum, tell us how you go about, you know, starting from scratch when you have a brand new course you're creating. And then they often veer into sort of scenario-based questions, where they're going to tell you, if this were to happen, how would you react to it? This is where most people don't have an answer. In fact, they'll fall into the, well, generally I get along well with it. If it were the question around, tell me about a time when you had to work with someone who was difficult to get along with, rather than having thought ahead that this is one of those top 10 questions you're probably going to get, and had a sample in mind, they'll say, well, usually I get along with people, and if we hit a wall, we just talk. Well, that's okay, but you can tell me about a time. And I have seen the rubrics that recruiters use on the other end, and that's a big ol' X, and you will just get 0 points for that response. So these behavioral-based questions are just based on the premise that your past behavior is a pretty good predictor of your future behavior. And that's why they're so predominant these days. So it's having those stories and examples at the ready. And what you'll discover after you interview is you'll go, oh, this might be the curriculum question. This is the how do I work with other faculty question. This is my leadership question. This is my last time I did something that failed and it didn't work out. How did I recover from it question? Because, you know, that's a piece of it too. Number 4, I think, on the list of skills employers are looking for. This past year, I've had 2 PhD candidates who were, I don't want to say this, uninvited from their programs. Should we call it that? Probably the most genteel way I can say it. And as we got digging in as to why, it was number 4 on that list, plan and organize your day. They felt like that was the thing that caused them from being successful. Because they never quite figured out how to do the research, how to take the courses, how to teach if that's what they were doing, how to support other faculty in their projects, again, depending on what they were doing, and they never were able to quite figure out how to make that all work. So, in fact, that number 4, that plan and organize your day, wasn't even on the list 5 years ago. So I have my personal beliefs. I blame social media. a little bit, because I know I used to be able to sit on a Sunday and read a book for like 3 or 4 hours straight. I cannot do that anymore. What do you think I'm doing instead of that? Facebook or Instagram or other stupid things that are taking me away from reading. Anybody else have that issue? Yeah. If you figure it out and work through it, come share with me your fix, because I'd love to know that personally. So this is, you know, something I want you to be ready for. So, and the flip side of that is when you think about the position you're targeting, whether it be industry or academia, you're going to want to say, you know, what are the things I don't want to hear about? My organizational, my planning, you know, depending on what it is you're targeting. And you got to have those stories at the ready. Short, concise stories. You'll see in the guide we provide you with the method, the old STAR method. It comes up again. What goes around comes around. As a method, you just make sure you're stating the situation. Well, when I was working on this project in this lab, a lot of people, if they do answer the question, will start in the middle, and they've left off some context that would help me understand what's going on. Does that make sense? How that might work? Okay. Any questions? Great. So keep that in mind. So first one almost always is tell me about yourself. What is unspoken in the second half of that question is tell me about yourself as it relates to this position. Anymore, I ask that second half myself, because I have been in far too many interviews where people start to be funny or try to be funny. That's almost that's a no-no, unless you know the interviewers, because it's really hard to get humor correctly. And I had the last interview, he said, well, I was born in a log cabin, and I'm like kicking my peers under the table as gently as I can, like no follow-up questions. You lost me right there. In that moment, I was done with this candidate. Maybe I'm sharing too much, but that's what this is about today, right? Because, you know, don't try to be funny. Don't waste our time. Tell me a little bit about yourself as it relates to this position. Now, typically, where are you going to draw from? What experiences are you going to draw from at this point in your career? School for sure. Your academics for sure. What else?
Yeah.
Any work, job experience, professional or otherwise. Because you may be extrapolating and using some experiences that were, 3 years ago, 4 years ago to bring up. Again, if they're great experiences. I was working with a student who one of the questions he was preparing for, because he'd actually gotten the questions ahead, which doesn't happen very often, was tell us about a goal you set for yourself and what you achieved. He was trying with this really convoluted way to make it be a goal that somehow related to the job he was targeting. And I knew him a little bit personally, and he had set a goal to run marathons, and I watched that progress over about a 3-year span of what he's done. I said, that's a great example. So if you have a great example that isn't as related as you might want it to be, but it's a great example of you setting goals and achieving goals, go ahead and use it and think that through. It's nice to have examples that relate to the work, obviously, but you can't always do that. I don't want you to downplay the story that you're telling by using something just because you feel like it's not as related. Because in reality, all past work experience is related. It's just how much depth do you share. Where else could you draw from? What other kind? You got work experience, academics? Any of you serve on committees? Train or hire undergrads? Absolutely. So there's all kinds of things you can be pulling from. And again, when I'm looking at apples and apples, conceivably, two candidates that seem very similar, typically I'm going to pick the one that's got those little extras that brought up that maybe they know how to supervise, because then I'm like, oh, there are typically 2 ways to grow your career, even with academics. You can become the expert and get deeper and richer and be the content knowledge expert in your area. You can do that in industry as well. Or you can move up, which Richard has done, and supervise others, train others, manage programs. Both equally, in fact, Kim Scott, one of my favorite authors, she's written a really good book recently called Radical Candor. Anyone read that? Really good. She talks about, and it makes up these titles, superstars and rock stars. And that one of those is each, one of those descriptors, someone who goes deeper into the content, and that you need both kinds of individuals in your organization. And I certainly had a bias towards people that wanted to move up. You want to manage projects, you wanted to train and hire more people, you want to do that kind of stuff. And the reality is I need those content experts as well, that just are really deep and rich in the subject area. So when you think about that, even the stuff that you might be reading that's ancillary to your career field, think about how it all works together and how you're this lovely package of soft skills and technical skills that they're looking for. Because the reality is not always the best candidate gets the job. How many people feel like that definitely happened in their life, right? For sure. Sometimes it's fit. Oftentimes it's fit. They could be wrong, but it's about them knowing who you're going to have to work with and how that is going to be successful for you and for the rest of the team. Any questions about this? Tell me about yourself. Question. It's often a starter, so have something ready. You know, a lot of students will get stuck on, well, do I tell them stuff that they already have in front of them on my resume? A little bit of that is fine too. You know, it's okay to say. It's almost like, does anyone remember the personal statements they wrote to get into grad school? Like they tend to follow sort of three. It'd be fun to write those now, wouldn't it? Well, maybe not fun. Interesting to write them now. You know, when did you first get excited about the field? So as a response to this, it can typically take sort of 3 little steps. When did you first get excited about the field that you're in? And that might have been high school, it might have been last week. You know, there's no right answer to that. Secondarily, what you've been doing to prepare. And most of you, of course, are preparing academically, and that's going to be the biggest what you're going to talk about. And then why is this position, that you're sitting here in front of this interviewer, why is this position going to get you where you want to go in your career? So that's kind of a nice answer to a lot of these questions, but this one especially. Okay? Yes?
How long should these
Yeah,
answers
good question.
tend, you know?
Really good question. And I was back to the gross generalization that I started with. Students typically are too short. So most systems, like HireVue and others that are standout and others that are designed to allow for online interviews of candidates between employers and colleges, have a 2-minute meter. 2 minutes is longer than you imagine, right? But it's also could be too short for some answers. So especially those multi-point, we just went through, as I said, on our team, we just hired an assistant director. And some of the questions were 3-phase, you know, so we were saying, note the question or let us know halfway through if you've forgotten what the last piece of the question is. So about 2 minutes, but even that, you know, I almost hesitate to say it because I don't want you to time them and cut things too short. But usually, especially if you're sharing for a behavioral-based question, you tell me about the situation, share the story. And I have, lately I've been seeing, well, I'll say it because we're going to count this. I want to get all of it. Great questions, though. Thank you so much. Can everybody see that? You got a chance to just scan that and answer. Okay, great. All right. Describe how you've involved undergraduates in your research. Has anyone had a chance to do that yet? I think there were a couple of you that had a chance to do that. Certainly, if you think about academia and you think about moving on, that's the apples and apples, right? I've got someone that has hired and trained new people to work in a lab or to conduct the research. You keep that kind of every day. And most hiring managers will or faculty or deans, depending on what the titles are we're playing. What's interesting to me is this piece. One of the things that you can do certainly ahead of time is there's kind of 3 layers. So let's just assume you're going for a traditional faculty position. You're going to research the institution, you're going to research the department, and you're going to research the faculty in that department. Because again, it does fall a little bit to you to tell me how you see yourself fitting into the department. If it is a classically faculty position, if it's not, same kind of thing. You know, what are you going to bring that maybe we don't have already? And you will hopefully uncover that by doing the research ahead of time. It may be that, is anyone in stats? That you get looking at the faculty and there isn't anyone doing anything cool around data visualization, and it's the thing that you just love and that you're really in the flow when you're working on. So it's helpful to know that when you do your research about an organization, it's the organization, the department or area you'll be working in, and of course, as much as possible, the people you'll be working with. I serve on a national, regional currently board, and I always know right after a board meeting, my LinkedIn profile goes crazy. It's like everybody that was at that board meeting is looking me up, and it makes me go, oh, I need to do more work on my LinkedIn. But that same kind of thing is going to happen for you. So a whole other workshop is LinkedIn. We can do that a whole other day if you'd like. But it's what void can you fill? What is missing in that department that you can bring to the table? And if you know that ahead of time, that again just helps you stand out. Because again, it also falls to you, especially if it's an industry position, to know where you want to fit in. Sometimes it's which location, is it R&D, is it somewhere else? Where do you want to fit in? It's not just the hiring manager's job to figure that out. So if there are multiple campuses, in fact, interestingly enough, I had a PhD in statistics recently who we went through sort of the top 10 interview questions. She was driving both tracks. She was looking for jobs in academia and industry at the same time. And she called me from the airport to say that the industry guy asked her every single question we reviewed. Because she was pretty sure they would, and they did anyway. So I think that's why she was kind enough to call me. But she ended up taking a teaching position, faculty. But that's typically for some of you. Could you see yourself doing that? Looking for industry positions at the same time as you were looking for faculty position? Two kind of different approaches. Some of it will cross over, but not all of it. So make sure you visit your career coach at Career Services for help along the way. We're in the ground level of the University Inn. And if you haven't yet, you can get to us via the phone. That works the old-fashioned way. Or you can open your Aggie Handshake account and click on Career Center and pick an appointment that way. So either one. Any questions about this? Ideally, you want something that shows them that you're going to have that little extra. I put the strengths and weakness question up there. A few years ago, I let these die. They just won't die. So I figured we just got to cover them. I didn't ask them in the last round because I have a personal bias kind of against them, but I feel like there are better things we could be asking, but they're not dying and they continue to get asked. So I want to make sure you're ready. So strengths, as much as possible, mention a strength. That's the other thing. People will tend to tell me 5 in the mock interview, which is fine, but 1. Okay. Maybe it's adjacent to something else. You really have to talk about them and this is such a fun group to talk about this in, because what I've discovered, and one way to discuss your strengths and weaknesses, because weakness is the very next question, is to think about them on a spectrum. I picked the wrong marker. Happens every time. Let's say organizational skills were at one end. Okay, what's at the other end of that? If you think about skills on a spectrum. Pardon?
Frazzled.
Ooh, okay, frazzled. If you were to think about that as the strength, what would the weakness be associated with this? I should have phrased it differently, my fault. If this is the strength, what's at the other end that might be a weakness? Chaos, or I guess what I'm thinking of, and again, all those are very good, is someone who's maybe incalcitrant or someone who's rigid, potentially. I'll give you a quick example. At a conference I went to recently, our keynote in the morning was about several other issues. But his story about his spouse, and he ended up talking about strengths and weaknesses. He said, I have a spouse that when I call her and say, where are the batteries? She will tell me what cupboard, what brand, and how many AAAs are in that cupboard. And he said, well, I love that. Guess what bugs him about her at the other day? Is some of this. A little bit of the rigidity, maybe lack of flexibility, inability, and I'm grossly generalizing here, inability to react on the fly to changes in the course of your day, any of that kind of stuff. So for those of you that are thinking, I don't know how I would answer this question, it's okay if they're linked, right? For me, my weakness is definitely patience, but the flip side of that is I get things done and I often ask for forgiveness later and permit, I don't tend to ask for permission and I just move things along. And that's probably a good thing in a higher education environment, right? For the most part, because the wheels turn a little more slowly than I'm comfortable with sometimes. So you can think about them that way. So if I were to ask what's your greatest strength, would someone like to share the answer? Anybody want to try it?
Stubbornness.
Go ahead. Tell us what it is.
Stubbornness.
Stubbornness, okay.
Get things
So,
done. So not stubbornness, that would be kind of like the
Perseverance.
negative side of perseverance. would
There
be
you
the
go.
Positive side of it, but
Yeah, and this isn't a behavioral-based question, but do you want to share an example anyway?
Yeah.
So go ahead and share
Oh,
one with
share
us.
one.
Yeah.
Just being stuck on a problem and not giving up and just digging until you find a solution.
Ask for help if need be, seek out experts, because that's something that we all struggle with, varying levels of ability to do that. Outstanding. Yeah.
So I kind of have a question
Please.
As to what you're trying to say about this whole kind of spectrum of
Yeah.
things, because I do like to look at strengths and weaknesses as any strength you can have will also have a
It-
weakness.
exactly,
to it,
it's gonna
and
have a
also your
corresponding.
weakness is going to have a strength depending
You
on
bet.
the context.
You bet.
So would it be appropriate to answer your questions like, because I do have a tendency to say that, like I joke that my perseverance is great, but it can also stubbornness.
Exactly. Well, and I actually like it because it shows some, it isn't about the answer. It's about your ability to reflect and think about yourself to self-improve, you know, all of those kinds of things. So that's part of why I like doing it that way, is it provides that. Also, having said that, well, let's shoot on to weakness real fast, because then we'll have that answer. Be thinking about your weaknesses. And is anyone going to say it's perfectionism? Because you can't. I'm just not going to let you. Now, having said that, I did have one employee over the years I stopped giving her projects, which was on me. I should have dealt with it better. I just stopped giving her projects because they never come back in any kind of timely way. I didn't have a deadline. I'd see it like 4 months later. You know, and sometimes good enough is good to go, right? So for her, I think it really was a problem, but it's getting old. You don't want to share what I call pseudo weaknesses. That's where kind of working off the spectrum. If you're not sure, that's one mechanism and one way to think about both ends of that, because you're absolutely right. For every weakness, there is a corresponding strength and vice versa. The key here is to share your workaround. I don't want you to tell me it's a term. I'll give you a cute, easy one. I have a guy, we're now on his 3rd job. He got and lost 2 in a row because he couldn't get to work in the 8s. This was him. And it took me a minute to realize what he was trying to tell me, is that he meant before 9 o'clock, he could not get to work. So I said, it's time for us to start thinking about a job for which getting to work in the 8s is not a big criteria, because there are others of those. And he was really open to that. And I've even had employees over time that I've gone to and said, I don't think this schedule's working for your biorhythms. You know, let's create something that works around and for you better. So you're not frustrated and I'm not frustrated. So the key with weakness is the workaround. And as well as some of those behavior-based questions, like let's say I did tell me about a time when you had to work with someone who's difficult to get along with. And you said you just threatened to fire the person and they bucked up and it was okay, but they, you know, ultimately they didn't last too much longer. Now, if that were to be your answer, the very next thing out of your mouth should be how you would do it better today if you had a chance to do it again. And my colleagues and I have some fun conversations around this. I actually really like to see someone who shares an example, and that's part of why the tell me about a time when something didn't go well question is typically in your, you know, you're going to get asked that when you failed at something. Because we want to know that you can fail, that you can learn from your mistakes, that you can apologize or own up to them. How many of you know adults that can't say I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's some smiles in there, and those are some fun stories. We have more time. But absolutely, yeah. So you want to be able to say, I messed up. This didn't work out the way I would have, and if I had it to do again, I would have had a completely different approach. I love to hear those kinds of stories in an interview because it tells me you're going to have that same, you know, if you hit a wall or a stumbling block, in my environment, you're not going to just be a bowl of jelly. You're going to figure out how to get beyond it. You're going to learn from your mistakes and you're going to move forward. So weakness question can be one of those. Some of those behavior-based ones where it's tell me about a time when you realize, man, that just didn't go well, but boy, I learned a ton. Because it is a reality, good, bad, or indifferent, right? That we learn more from the things that are hard than the things that come easily. So sometimes those difficult experiences end up being the best fodder for your examples because they were difficult and you learned a lot coming out the other side. And so far, I've never heard of an environment or a situation where that didn't work out for someone to share something they had done that they would never do again because it didn't go well for them. Okay? Any questions about these two? Because they can be challenging. Anyone know a weakness? Someone want to share a weakness answer? Yes, please.
I have a tendency to say whatever comes out of my mouth without thinking about it.
I love that. What's your workaround? How do you adjust it?
If at all possible, I just keep my mouth shut.
Interesting.
If I have to say something, I'm working on pausing first.
Count to 10 before. I lately, I say it so I don't forget it, which is ridiculous, you know. So I don't reflect as much as I should because I'm worried I'm going to forget a question or the comment or whatever it is that we're discussing. So yeah, that's totally fine. Also, it isn't one that sends up an inordinate amount of red flags, like getting to work in the 8s, you know, which might for some employers. So having said that, I do want you to apply a little bit of a filter to your strengths and weakness answers. Don't pick something that's super English. You know, I am incredibly disorganized and I have a real hard time getting my act together. You laugh, I have heard it. Yeah. You know, what is
I
it?
don't know how to get around it yet. Organization is a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And I
I keep trying to use different systems and it's getting better, but it's a slow process.
Yeah, it still is. You know, I have another new employee, our career fair coordinator. And I noticed she's gone and bought larger sticky notes. And that's her process. She's got rows of them in her office. So whatever works. That's a constant process. Like a lot of things in life, you haven't arrived. And when you feel like you've arrived, you probably should examine yourself. Because you need to revisit. All right, outstanding. So be aware, it's the workaround that I'm after and the reflection that I'm really after with those questions. Tell us about an introductory course, a lesson in an introductory course that you taught that went well and why. What do you think I'm going to get out of that answer? Especially if I'm hiring you to teach. Oh, you were going to share your weakness. Did you want to go back and do that?
I was gonna ask a question, but I think
Oh,
the answer is it seems like the weakness needs a trick.
Yeah, I think I don't want you to feel about it that way, but I can, you know, you're gonna feel how you feel about it. I think the answer is share something that is a true weakness, but that you're working on, or you feel like you've worked on it and you pretty well got it under control.
Yeah, how do you filter?
Yeah. The filter, you know, there are some good sides to that too, but that would, you know, that might take a conversation down a different road. Yeah. So back to this, if I ask you this question, what kinds of things will I uncover about
What kinds of things you struggle with or get hung up
you?
on?
Absolutely. Yeah, what works well for you, what doesn't. I might get a sense of how applications oriented you are in your curriculum design. Are you ensure there's a piece of that wherever possible? I just met with a newly hired PhD in education, and she shared a new little book for me that I'm loving about stopping midway every class and resetting, making sure everybody's with you. And even though these are college level classes, it's not inappropriate to stop every 15, 20 minutes and touch base and touch in. Depends on the classes, right? Yeah, I'm going to get a sense of how you develop curriculum. Did you go to experts? Did you do research on your own? Did you go sit in on some classes that you thought highly of? Long ago and far away, I student taught as part of my master's program. And I thought, the teacher's lounge, finally, you know, I gotta go in the teacher's lounge. Well, I discovered very quickly that that was no place to be at lunch. Everyone in that room was complaining about the students. So, and it just was starting to affect me and my enthusiasm for what I was doing. So I decided that I was gonna go watch great classroom teachers, whatever the curriculum was, because you know who they are. And having raised two daughters in this valley, I can count them on maybe 1.5 hands, which is makes me kind of sad. But having said that, you know, I went and watched them, and it was things I was learning were classroom management stuff. You know, things that weren't related at all to my curriculum, but they were incredibly insightful, and they made me a better student teacher in the span of time that I was student teaching. Same thing holds true in industry. You can't know right away which group you're getting in with, just as a little aside. You know, you just can't know from day one who's well thought of in an organization. And sometimes, I see some money, sometimes you can align yourself with a group that maybe has a reputation for not doing a great job, or a couple of faculty member who may have that same reputation. So it's something to be careful about, and it's really nice if you can know as much of that ahead of time, so you can go learn from the superstars and the people that are doing the things that you need to do well. It's also, you know, when I get to this curriculum question, I'm going to have a sense of what tools you use, but more specifically, what your process is. And that's often what I'm getting at. What's going on behind the scenes with your answer? I love this question. Someone want to tackle that one? Yes, please.
Okay. So I was a manager in my major professor's research lab, and I was her primary doctoral student, and we had several master's students that I was working with, sort of like down the line. And a couple of the master's students, we initially got along really well, but then we started having clashes, and it caused problems with the work because feelings were hurt and communication barriers sprung up all over the place. And it was a really painful process, but what I found is that at the get-go, I needed to start out with a little more of little more boundaries, and as we go along, then and establish our work rhythm, then the boundaries can come down. But you need to start out a little bit more reserved, and also if you are having an interpersonal relationship issue, don't address it. But you need to address it, but don't address it while you're trying to get something done. Put that aside and focus on the task. Don't focus on the feelings, focus on the task.
Okay. Only issue I have with that is you didn't tell me about one particular instance.
Oh.
So that's that piece of that, right? It's easy to do this, isn't it? And people a lot of times don't get credit for answering the question. Because I feel there was a lot of good stuff there, but you got to tell me about a time. So it starts with that tell me about a time. So pick one person, one incident, and share it. Otherwise, perfect. Okay, great. So that's that piece, and this is common whatever environment you're in. And in fact, one of my daughters over the summer, she was on an all-female team of 4 wildlife techs, and one of them she just never clicked with. And you know, it's like to no fault of anybody's, you know, but her working through that, now she's got that answer for her next set of interviews, and she's already got a couple offers for the next round. Oh, good. The key here is you don't want to throw that individual under the bus and say he or she was just a, you know, whatever word you want to use. You want to show that as much as possible. And this is where you could have handled it poorly and learned a ton. So you can always use one of those where you handled it poorly, but you walked away with a lot of knowledge to face it the next time. You want to help them do better. Because again, I want people on my team that can mentor one another. Can't always just be my role to give a thumbs up or to congratulate. I want them encouraging and supporting one another as much as possible.
So my question is, based on what she had as an example,
Yeah.
how much more detail should she share in that way?
Well, I think starting with, and I saw you pause, and I thought that was great. You paused, and you said, well, when I was running the lab, because that's the piece sometimes I won't get. I had this guy, and it's just, I wanted to know that she was supervising master's students in the lab. So what was the incident? And you can work through that STAR approach even as you write your sample answers. What happened, and ultimately what was the result? And that's where, again, if the result wasn't as good, or you could say, you know, I had the same interchange a month later and it went so much better because what I learned. Okay, did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, if I've got 2 candidates and someone looks like they can mentor employees better or help me support the rest of the team better, always going to pick that individual because, you know, supervising, training, hiring, and developing employees is a huge cost for an organization. Turn over to you. Do you have any idea what it costs to hire a faculty member?
You're talking about doing a startup package,
Yeah, like everything that it takes to get them here.
engineering and sciences, you might be thinking
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of money. And to bring someone on board only to realize 6 months or a year in that they're not a good fit for the organization doesn't serve anyone, let alone the candidate, right? Yes.
What if there's not a great moral that comes to it? Like I had several supervisors, and one of them, she was just crabby. But she was crabby universally, but I'm a little bit more sensitive, and I was also newer at the time. And so I just had to learn that to not take it personally and to kind of turn the other cheek. Is that enough of a moral that I can just suck it up?
Yeah, I think so. I do, because the reality is we all have to learn that. We have to learn it again and again, don't we? I know my office is near the bathroom. So some of my team will come in and always say hi on the way in the morning, especially if we haven't seen each other yet. Other times they'll pass me right by. And in the early days of my career, I thought, we're also egocentric, right? What did I do? I must have done something to cause this person to not say good morning to me today. Well, 99.9% of the time has nothing to do with me. And the dog got out, or they got in a fight with their spouse before they head out the door, whatever. And by the way, they get you out of a ticket. It's worked for me. But beyond that, that was the tip of the day. Beyond that, sure. You know, I just learned that not everybody is a happy-go-lucky individual, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I was thinking these too much. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, there doesn't always have to be some big earth-shattering moment that you had. But think it through. If you're feeling like maybe that's not a strong enough story, then maybe there's another story in there. Okay? Go with your gut instincts. Don't ignore those, because they're probably right on. Okay? Any other questions at this point? These are the biggies. Why should I hire you, and/or why do you want this job? Almost always you're going to get that at the end. Almost always. How do you tackle it? Yes.
Well, kind of follow-up question, how personal should you be
Yeah.
with this?
Yeah, really good question. It's entirely likely, certainly I have over my career gotten illegal interview questions many, many times. Earlier in my career than now, gratefully, when I was even less capable of answering them. Isn't that lovely? That's just the nature of the beast. So you might want to be aware of some of those so that you're not offering them, right? Typically, in fact, it's what's so weird about social media is that, HR law starting here from these were all books on HR practice. Chapter 1, page 1 is no photographs. Guess what 94% of employers are doing before they even do their interviews? Looking at your social media. And 94% are looking at social media, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn. Right away, until there's more case law around this, and I hate to suggest that, but that's probably what it's going to take before employers stop looking at your social media before they hire you. Now, LinkedIn's supposed to be the professional way, so I highly recommend, you still want a good LinkedIn photo, but that's that way you can package yourself and present yourself on LinkedIn in the way you want to be presented. There's also a weird dichotomy age-wise between the groups and things that people will do on social media that are younger who say, this is sort of my fantasy realm. Right? I can join groups I would never join otherwise, but I can talk about things I might not ever talk about there. And that's very different sometimes than the people hiring on the other side who think that everything that's on that social media is exactly who you are. So that's a problem. Yes.
I don't have any social media. Do you recommend having?
Yeah, I would. That's a really good question. First and foremost, congratulations. But I think secondarily, it depends on the industry that you're going into. If you want to be a mass communication faculty member, you need social. Does that help answer your question? Natural resources, I'm seeing it less and less, but more now. So it kind of depends on the industry a little bit. So that's all I can say about it. It kind of depends on what direction. Marketing faculty, you ought to be on there, that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. Great question. This question, does it come to the end typically? Oh yes, please.
Well, I just wondering on this, we can about there moving on to the next.
No, I'm not. I'm gonna leave it here.
But maybe it's not like it. But one thing is, maybe we can tell this, there's kind of issue of how much you bragging, I'm really good at all this.
Good question.
How you try to be a little bit humble and not be positive. So
Yes.
what is that balance?
Yeah. Did you submit that question ahead of time?
No.
No, someone else did in the room. So thank you for asking that because I forgot to mention it. It's another spectrum, right? Like most of life. Confident and pompous, right? And all that's in between. This is your forum to be assertive. I'm going to use that word. I'm going to say we don't want to veer into aggressive, but you need to, whoever is the best coach in your life or the most positive individual that helps you speak to the strengths and the talents you bring to the table. Just imagine that person is with you in that moment. What happens often is, I don't want to get too far away, but that people tend to feel like, and some of it is cultural too. Different cultures have different abilities or different backgrounds about talking yourself up, right? This is your moment. This is your moment to shine. Does anybody know about the power pose? Probably you've seen, I always forget the name of the woman that does the video, or the TED Talk. I had a PhD student recently. She had 3 days of interview in the Midwest, and she's a very quiet, reserved individual. She asked me about her energy level and how she could keep it up. And she did the power pose in the bathroom like 5 times over the course of those 3 days. You just stand like, I say Wonder Woman because I'm a woman, and she's my hero. You stand in that power pose for 2 minutes. And if you watch the TED Talk, it really does change your physiology and your brain chemistry a little bit and makes you feel stronger, more powerful. And that's where you want to be. Confidence is king in this entire process. And guess what the process itself does to you? Yeah, It beats the confidence out of you, darn it. And that's a terrible conundrum, but it's true. Confidence is critical in this process. So be as assertive and positive about your skill sets as possible. And I think probably you need to worry less about being too pompous than you may be. We just want you to be confident. Now, do you lie and say you know how to do things you don't have any exposure to? No. But if you've had any exposure, well, think back to one example, the candidates we just interviewed that we did the RD's 4th or so of January. One candidate said, no, I don't have any experience with that, and stopped. What could you then add if you didn't have any experience with that? What could you say? I want to learn, share a story where you're self-taught, where you learned something on your own and was ready to roll. In fact, I said to her when we were done with the interviews, I told the committee, I said, I hope she reaches out so I can help her do better next time, because we didn't offer her the job. And that was the issue for her. She'd say, no, I don't have any experience, and that was the end of the sentence, like 5 different times in her interview. Even if it was just no, but boy, is that interesting. I can't wait to learn more about it. Can you tell me a little bit? You know, and again, I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. You have to find your rhythm and mechanism, because in fact, trying to be like somebody else or somebody you're not naturally never pays off. You can never keep it up. So we want you to answer and reflect and be just who you are in that moment, but your best self, your most energized, strong superwoman or superman self, okay? Any other questions about this? This is one of the top 5 problems, mistakes people make in interviews, is they don't answer. They don't say in so many words that they want the job. Lots of different times to do that. You guys have a question?
Yeah, I just see on your example answer, I'm really excited to move to the coast. How much can you, like, does that make it seem like you want the actual job less? If it's like, yes, but I also,
Good point.
or like, I want to, for my boyfriend, move to California.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how
Yeah.
much to.
Great question. It's imperative that you tell them you want to be on the coast for a lot of reasons. Hiring tends to be regional. The same problems I have when I talk to my peers just talking to a friend of mine at Harvard, another one at Boston College. Hiring is a lot of regional stuff. So who wants to go to Atlanta after they graduate? I don't know why I picked Atlanta. Just nobody. Let's say somebody did. If you have some connection to Atlanta, you understand what humidity is about. Or if you're in wildlife and you want to go to the south, do you know the size of those bugs? Because I have picked what we will call a palmetto bug off my foot at Cafe Du Monde in New Orleans that was almost the size of my foot. And I kicked and ran and even looked. I landed in someone's cafe au lait. But yeah, those things are important, I guess is my point. And yet, for all we know, getting to the coast is your #1 priority. Once you're there, you're going to job hop like crazy. I don't know that. But absolutely, if there's some connection or some reason you want to be there, having lived there as a young child, I'm anxious to get back. I want to know that there's something about the place as well that is attractive to you. Some data is currently showing that the place is more relevant for recent college graduates than the work, which is kind of different. We can see it though, right? It's not. My colleague and I were both originally from California, walked in together this morning, and I said to her, do you ever have days where you wonder why you left? This is one of those days. Yes.
One question I have on this, and kind of like how much you really want the job. You mentioned this person was going to interview 3 different places at the same time. Many of us are probably multiple jobs.
For sure.
And how do you go in and be sincere? I really want this job.
Yeah.
Well, it might actually be your second or third choice, but you want to get a how do you be honest and still convey enthusiasm.
Outstanding question. You know, we hope anyway that you're not in your, that you've dug in, what, let's say it's a faculty position. You know where you fit into that department, the kind of work those faculty are doing, and you're excited to do it with them. That might be the thing that you talk about for that institution. For another, has anyone seen the campus, the Pepperdine campus at Malibu? Oh my gosh, I'd be surfing all day. I barely get to work. It is so gorgeous and right on some of my favorite all-time beaches. So for me, I'd say I'd love to be at your Malibu location at Pepperdine. But I'd be lying through my teeth because I'd have a hard time staying focused. That's why I didn't go to UC Santa Barbara for college, because it was right on the beach I always surfed on, and I'd never go to class. I knew it. So you're absolutely right. You want to be as sincere as you possibly can, but it might be different things for different schools. It might be the program, the hole that you see in the curriculum, the void that you feel like you could fill. It might be location somewhere else. A lot of people travel with partners, and when you're trying to do that, especially if you're in the same career field, I had 2 physics PhDs one year that I was working with. And I just like, shit, I'm like, could you have at least had different fields of study? You know? And we ended up just picking really big markets. We picked Chicago and the coast for places that had many schools, so they could both get a job at institutions at the same time. And I think they ended up in Chicago. Please.
So I actually have an interview with a university that I'm very, very excited about, and I really, really, really want that one.
Yes.
How do I not appear desperate?
Right.
I will do anything to get this job. Just hire
Because you
me.
don't really want anybody taking you up on that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, exactly. Outstanding question. I think you can articulate it. In fact, a lot of people say, well, where do I say that? I think sometimes at the end is a really nice time to say, after having talked with you today, because I'm on the phone, I am even more excited about the prospect of becoming part of your team or being in this department. That's all you have to say. You don't have to go on ad infinitum. But it's nice to say the words, right? It's like, I don't know if anybody knows those 5 love languages book, you know, for how you like to get and receive things. You know, sometimes you need to hear the words, and these hiring managers need to hear that you really want the job. So just something like that, you know. I can really see myself fitting in, and particularly the growth you see in environmental education is really exciting to me, and I think I could step right into that. We all want people that are gonna come on the job, very little training, very little supervision, do great things, and stay forever, right? In a perfect world, you know, that's what every manager wants. Great questions. It's been a fun group. Okay, anything else around those? Great. Let's see what else I got. Okay, couple just quickies here. Questions for you to ask them. This can be post-interview. I can't tell you how many times, because I think I get put on screening committees because they know I'll bring the question list. This is the real motivation for asking me to be on committees. But I can tell you 9 times out of 10, at the end, if we're thinking apples and apples, these are in your guide. I know that, these questions are well, sometimes we'll look back at the questions they asked us. 5 or 6 employees ago, a woman said to us, I noticed on your website that you work with community members. That's unusual for a career center. Tell me about that. She had to dig in. I don't know how many of us find that. In fact, we don't advertise at the time because we would do that all day long. And we were like, you know, that's not why we get state money. Tell community members, right? We get it to tell you. So, but she dug in, and it was an interesting question. And ultimately, it was one of the reasons we offered her the job. So there are 2 here that I love, and I want you to ask them every time if you can. This is one of my very favorites. When you think of the ideal candidate you have had in this role, and maybe 3 is too many, maybe it's 2. What 2 traits or skills did they bring to the table? I love this because inherent in that question is you want to be the best, right? You want to aim high. We all aim for something and end up somewhere less. That's just the reality of life. Secondarily, you may hear things that were nowhere on paper, nowhere in the interview, you know, nowhere in the description, nowhere else. And now you know all of a sudden 2 things that they really value that you didn't know before. Now, in the moment, if you can say, it's so interesting you mentioned that, because just this last semester, I learned how valuable that could be, and share a story. If you can't do it then, perfect fodder for your thank you note after the fact, which I highly recommend you always send.
So at what moment you ask those questions?
Yeah, typically they'll ask you a bunch of questions, and then it'll be your turn to ask questions. Always ask questions. I don't care if it was the best group of interviewers you've ever encountered and they answered every conceivable question you might have. Ask something, and always ask questions. So, you know, you don't have to ask every one of these, right? And certainly how you'll be evaluated. And the last one, I'll do this and then make sure I answer your question. I always want you to ask this one as well. What are the next steps in the process? This gives you a good idea of how and when you'll follow up, because follow-up is key. I just helped I hate to share this story, one of my favorite faculty members on campus leave to go to industry after years of being a faculty member. Sometimes I don't mind helping people leave, and other times it's like, I don't want you to leave. You know, I want to help everybody fulfill their dreams, but sometimes you want to keep some of your favorites on campus. For him, this was his issue. He hadn't done any follow-up. He would interview and that was it. So the thank you note after and the follow-up. I'm still very excited about the prospect of this position. So you may hear that we've recently reorganized and it's going to be at least 6 weeks because we've got to figure out our new org structure. And then you'll know that 5 weeks and 6 days is when you're reaching out. right away and again then. So I don't know that I answered your question though.
Yeah.
Kind of? Okay, great. And these are just a batch. I mean, if you Google questions to ask in a PhD interview, you'll find a zillion. Just make sure it isn't the one if you're interviewing to get into the program, because there is that distinction. Other questions, concerns, please.
So I've worked at places and I've had colleagues that worked at places that they would never recommend anyone. Is there a way, what tips do you have when we're looking for a job to know? Because they all kind of look same-ish, for this specific job.
So how to distinguish the quality of the jobs themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah, really good question. In fact, I have a colleague who interviewed here for a job, and she said she didn't like the dynamic in the group. It was like they were fighting with each other the whole interview. And she actually went to the director of the center and said, I think I want to withdraw my application. And she talked her out of it. They offered her the job. She's there. Now, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for her. But the dynamics that she saw in that interview, because they didn't disappear, that she's going to find a way to work in amongst that. But there's some of that that's just gut instinct. And I highly recommend you don't ignore your instincts. Beyond that, it might be, is there a void in the area I have a particular interest in? Or the flip side, is there a really good nationally recognized faculty doing great research in the area of my interest? One of the things too well, that's on the flip side. I know when I was getting ready to do my orals, my faculty never went on staff. So that was a challenge, So are you working in interdisciplinary teams in the job? Because that's certainly something that is valuable and will help you grow your career. So there's a whole nother list of examining negotiating salaries. It's a real good one-on-one appointment. In fact, our engineering coach is probably doing more of that right now than any other appointment. We've got every different engineers getting offers right now. So yeah, it's just when they look at you and say, does it bother you that I'm going to make more than you do? I had one do that to me once, and I said, not till right now.
That's a little condescending.
That was a little bit. I also was like, well, half the time that's something. No, so great question. Growth potential. If it's faculty, it's a whole different ballpark than if it's industry. If it's industry, are there multiple offices, multiple locations across the country or globally that you can grow your career? Because if it's industry, often you have to grow your career by moving. Not all industries, but a lot. We have a local regional employer in Ogden that really doesn't like to hire any of our engineers, so they've been somewhere else and then come back. Because he wants them to have a different perspective on the curriculum, on everything, working with others, all that.
So it's kind of a two-part thing. Do your homework and fill out your instincts.
Yeah, when you're there. Yeah. And there's a lot. We've got a little bit up here about preparing. I recommend it, especially for those of you going to college campuses, got to be one of the hardest things to find your way around everywhere. And go a little early if you can go and figure out the day before where the interview is going to be. Do that, but you don't want to arrive more than 10-15 minutes early, because you'll be setting the person off, that's waiting to get you into the next interview. But you want to know where the space is. You want to have gone and experienced it. Again, first impressions, so dress can be important as well. A lot of our students will say, well, I want to dress like the recruiters. Well, the hiring managers or recruiters are typically in khaki pant and a polo shirt. And that may not, for the industry, that may not be appropriate for you to do. I know even still my daughter's always sending pictures. Is this okay? I'm wearing this for the interview. So, but you need to know the organization, the department, the people you're going to work with as much as possible. And LinkedIn's a wonderful way to figure that out. Of course, faculty pages, you can click on all of the faculty and know what their research is. And then you stand back for a second and say, what's missing from this department? Because that's also something that the departments themselves are always struggling with. We want to be on the cutting edge. We want to be providing the latest and greatest research opportunities, curriculum for our students. Not always do you have the faculty in place to deliver that. So if you do discover that there's a hole right in your area of interest, that's exciting. Or like I said, the flip side, there's someone doing great work in your area of interest. You want to be talking about that. Just make sure there isn't anything else. Yeah, arrive on time, introduce yourself. Just know that from that first, if anyone's organizing site visits for you or the trip for you, if there was someone that helped you book your flight, send that individual thank you note right along with everybody else if at all possible. Everybody from people at the front welcoming you in the door to the VP is interviewing you all along the way. Interviews, sometimes they'll take you a whole day, they'll take you to a meal. I had 2 team members, neither one is still here, that when recruiters would take us to lunch, they would order the most expensive. Drove me nuts. And again, you know, that's my weakness. I should have said something about it before they did it like 2 or 3 times. But they did it 2 or 3 times. You know, keep that in mind. Maybe not, unless you're really good with pasta. I'm Italian, you know. My grandfather taught me how to eat it without getting all over me. But, you know, think about what you're ordering. Alcohol is a whole other issue. You know, it's fine to have a drink, but you don't want to get sloppy. So keep that in mind too. It's a little harder here sometimes. We talk about that with our students that are heading out because they're not experienced or ready for that sometimes. I know I was just at a conference and 2 of the president, incoming president and outgoing president called me to the presidential suite at Disneyland because they were putting out all the wine for a reception that night and none of them drank. So I volunteered, someone had to do it. I had to taste the first 5 they'd opened to say which 2 they should put out first. Again, you know, I throw myself on the sword whenever I'm asked. But because either one of them, one doesn't drink anymore and one never drinks. So they need some help. And I was happy to of course, they left, they had to go do something else. And I said, well, I'm not leaving. I still have all these little tasties. And so I called 2 of my colleagues, you gotta come see this suite. It's amazing. But, you know, keep in mind that everything you do, from the hello when you walk in the door or you arrive a half hour early and you're on your phone the whole time, highly recommend leave your phone in the car. Even looking at your phone before the interview can set some people off. Not everybody, but some. Okay? Thank the interviewer. Let the interviewer bring up salary if at all possible. It's kind of like buying a car. You want them to be the first people to talk about money. We get quarterly data. I get 4 reports a year with national data for all of the career fields that you're interested in typically. The one that I don't know if I have as good of, there are PhD numbers in there too, but my data is recent hires. Most of you are going to have associations, journals, most practicing journals, not all, but a lot will do a salary survey once a year that'll be in that journal, telling you what people with more experience than just recent hires have found. Because you want to have that knowledge. You know, I always recommend knowing what that range is that you want to get, and then tell me why you expect to be at the high end of that range. Everything starts from this salary that you're starting at. So it's important that you negotiate for that first salary and have it be as high as the market will bear. Yes, please.
You talked about having a set of questions to ask towards the end of the interview when you're presented with an opportunity to ask questions. How do you feel about engaging in questions during the first part of the interview and trying to turn that into more of a conversation rather than you sitting there giving an answer?
Right. Yeah, I think that's really great if you've got a good group of interviewers. I think there's so much variation in skill sets for people that do the interviews, that if you can start that way and say, please ask anywhere along the line, or you ask them other kind of ancillary questions to your main questions as you're going along, you'll create that kind of environment. But it really falls to the interviewer to create that kind of environment, and not everybody can do it. If it's a panel.
About the interviewee, you're the one being interviewed.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate for you to be responding to their questions, but at the same time asking your questions to open a dialogue? Open a dialogue rather than just a one-way.
Right. For sure. Again, I think it's going to depend on how comfortable the panel or the person that's controlling the interview made that person feel. You don't want to run away from the interview, but you do have to know that especially if you have someone on the other side that isn't getting at what you know they need to know about you, sometimes you do have to take control of that. You want to tell yourself, what are the 5 things they have got to know about me before I leave today? And if they didn't ask them every open-ended question, is your chance to get those in. So it depends, I guess. It depends. You don't want to take over the interview and they never got, because they're facing, HR rules that say they have to ask every candidate the same 10 questions or 12 questions. So the other thing to be aware of too as an interviewer is how much time you're taking in the questions you're asking. Usually if the interviewer is good, they've said we have 45 minutes, we have maybe a dozen questions for you, we'll have time for Q&A. So you then have to kind of balance. You can't take 20 minutes to answer a question. So it's a give and take. I think it's great when you can get there, for sure. Yeah, so having questions along the way, and if it is appropriate, say, I was gonna save this question for later, but can I ask it now? It seems appropriate, go ahead and do that. Like saying things like, wow, that's a great question, can I take a moment? It shows a level of maturity, we should do that, rather than try just to fill the space with sound. Right? How many people get nervous and just keep talking? Yeah, maybe you.
Yes.
Absolutely. So kind of catch yourself and say that. When it's your turn to ask them questions, you can say, absolutely, may I look at my notes? If you were to get stuck along the way and they are asking you the leadership question, and tell us about a time when you led a team or a project, how did that go? And you have totally spaced which example you were going to use, you could have in your folio leadership with a couple bullets. The story about when I ran this thing, or that volunteer project, or whatever it might be. Just glance at, say, you know, I've drawn a blank, and I look at my notes, glance at it, close it, answer the question. Yeah. That kind of stuff really shows a level of maturity. And that if I throw you in, I was on a committee recently, and this woman was hired. She went to a meeting for her boss, and man, they ate her up. You know, sometimes on campus, those meetings can be vicious. And she went back thinking, why did I take this job? Why would she accept me? And she called me like just frantic. And it turns out that everything she got to do in there was a great example of the kind of stuff she's gonna have to face, which is why her boss sent her in. Maybe she could learn her a little, I don't know. But you need to be ready for some of this, no matter what you get thrown. You can get wacky questions like, if you were a cupcake, what flavor would you be? If you were an animal, those are just ridiculous. They're really, I was just in LA and went to a session at SpaceX. That was the coolest day, by the way. So fun. Anyone in aerospace or interested in space? After I got student SpaceX and Northrop Grumman all in one day. And it was fabulous because the whole focus was on how to be 0.5% of the people they hire. But one of the things she talked about too is that sometimes, depending on the team, they may ask those questions. Do they care what animal or cupcake you are? No. What do they really want to know?
I have no idea.
I have no idea. Yeah. Can you think on your feet a little? Is there at least a process to your thinking? Like I've had some students that are the flip side. Well, I'm going to say a fox because they're wily, and they thought the whole darn thing through. That may be at the other extreme, but every now and then you get some of them. Someone will throw some of those back at you. It really is in the best interest of the interviewers to put you at ease, to make you comfortable, so we're representing your best self that day. Having said that, there are some people that just don't operate that way, that want you to be nervous or intimidated, which, ultimately, that if you're hiring for attitude, which is really huge, what attitude, because we can teach about cheese, for hiring for attitude, doing some of that is not to the best of their interest, but we still see that happen.
Do you have any tips for interviewing over the phone?
Yeah, that's a really good one. One thing is I do say smile a lot because, believe it or not, your smile can come through the line. You'd be surprised. Maybe for those of you, it depends. Like some of you were here early enough, I had snow boots on. I taught my morning class and left the snow boots on. For you, I had to put the shoes on so that I could be in the right mindset to teach this workshop today. So some people like to dress for the interview, even though it's on the phone. Are you at your best self when you're in your jammies? Maybe not. So maybe you want to dress. Feel free to come use a space in our office. If you want a quiet space, we've got one that's all aligned with a photo behind you, so it's not just a blank wall. Smile, be yourself, pause. Again, a lot of things people try to fill every blank, quiet moment with your voice, because you can't fill it with theirs, right? So all you can do is keep talking. So it's okay every now and then to stop, to ask things like, did I answer your question? Because you aren't getting the feedback that you're going to get in person, and that's hard. So if it is a complicated question or it has multiple parts, stop. See, I believe I answered the first part. Could you restate that second part for me? Just do as much of that as you can throughout the process. And put yourself in the right frame of mind, do the power pose for 2 minutes, and you'll be ready to roll. Please.
How do you recommend responding to questions that you should not be asking?
Yeah. Well, if someone was going to ask me that. It's hard
There are
because.
questions that you should be
Yeah.
asking.
Oh, there are those questions?
Because they
Oh.
can be kind of sneaky in like,
Well, a lot of them, and I'm going to grossly generalize, they typically happen to women. Well, let's see, you just got married. When do you plan to have a baby? I've been asked that more than once. And it's a highly illegal question. Now, I could stand up and go, well, that's a stupid question, and it's illegal anyway, and march myself right out, right? whereas if I want that job, there's no traction in that approach, right? So typically what I always do when I've encountered that is, I do have skills in the area you're looking for. Can you tell me again how that might be relevant to this issue? You can push it back to them. A lot of times it's unspoken, but it's happening anyway, right? Even for myself, I just hired a recent young graduate. She's married. And I understand just from getting to know her, she's only been here a week, that having a family is on her agenda. My brain can't help but go, oh, she comes right, could be but those are them. They're typically personal. Age, race, religious preferences, sexual preferences, those are all around the illegal question. And they just shouldn't be asked. So ideally, you go right back to, oh, it's really great talking about this job. Can you tell me how that might be relevant? And usually it sort of shuts it down because they realize it's not relevant. Anyone else have any other suggestions for that? Anyone encountered it? Because if you still want the job, and that's the other part of it, is if it's 5 or 6 of those in a row, you might say, well, this organization or this group doesn't seem to value the things that I value, and maybe this isn't a good fit for me. But, having said that, not everybody knows that they shouldn't be asking those things.
Is it okay, because part of me, I feel like I want to be as transparent as possible. Is it okay if I disclose some of those things? I'm not gonna go into detail about my reproductive plans for the next 5 years, but, I feel like I'm hiding something if I try to sidestep those.
Yeah. Well, if it doesn't come up, I don't know that I'd volunteer it. Try to, again, focus on the work, the soft skills and the technical skills that you have that relate directly to your ability to do this job well. Having said that, well, like a lot of our interviews, there'll be the formal interview, and HR will tell you what you can ask and what you can't ask. You have to ask the same questions ideally of each candidate, even though follow-up questions are variable. So the follow-up questions where a lot of people get themselves in trouble. I would just say it's the same with negative information, or the reason you left your job, or the reason you don't have one of the skills on the laundry list of 12 zillion skills I'm looking for, right? Don't bring up the one thing you don't have. It's like, anybody have a performance review where there's 26 really great things they could say about you, and you'll talk about the one negative for the whole hour, and you never get to the 26 great things. Yeah. So don't bring up negatives as much as possible. And then as well, don't share some of that unless it seems very appropriate or there's a reason for it to be shared. I apologize, guys. I don't have the illegal interview questions to ask you in my mind. I'll work on that. Thank you. Give me some homework. Other questions? I'm basically done, but I'm happy to hang for a little bit because I know we have a little more time. If you just want some one-on-one questions, thank you so much for your time. But go ahead, please.
So say you've been asked a question and you completely drop blank. You ask for some more time. And even after a few moments, you realize you've timed out.
I got nothing.
Is it appropriate to ask the interviewer to come back to that question another time?
Absolutely. In fact, it's kind of what Richard was talking about. There's a point at which you can engage in how this interview goes as much as anybody. And I love this. I really do. Because I have seen plenty of people that power their way through and bluff and don't succeed, that I'd rather they do that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then maybe follow.
Please.
How do you balance between being well prepared and coming out as too rehearsed? And
That's kind of referred to your question a little bit too. Again, it's on that spectrum. I would say at least practice the answers so that you've heard them out loud once and that they followed across today. What was I facing? How did I deal with it? What were the results? That I follow some sort of a process. I guess my gut reaction is I haven't seen too many people that fall into that second boat that are too practiced. I'd almost say, more practice is good. You don't want to this is, sighing under your breath, given the realization that, another one of these questions.
I guess an example of what's your greatest weakness? Or an example of weakness. When an interviewer who covers the STAR method that comes up but gives you sort of a pseudo weakness, is that better or worse than someone who maybe doesn't follow that method but to you seems more
something real? I'll take authentic every day. Yeah, because you can't keep up with the other. It's like dating, right? You have to be who you really are day one, because otherwise there's this day or month, year where it all falls apart, right? So same thing, yeah. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. You need to know, is this the department? Like that woman that I referenced to was gonna pull herself out of the pool after being in the room with those people. She thought, they don't even like each other. I don't want to be part of this team. Bad team dynamics for one. Maybe the wrong people on the hiring committee. You know, so you don't want to make a judgment about it just solely on that one experience. But yeah, authentically you is what we're after. Exactly. So if you err on, you know, saying, gosh, you really throw me with that, I've just got nothing right now, can you come back? That's wonderful. That shows me a sense of your ability to sort of think on your feet, a maturity level that recognizes that that's better than you just bullying head making stuff up. Great questions. It's been wonderful. Please.
Can we ask them to tell us what they think they're
Absolutely. Yeah.
department?
Yeah. What's your favorite thing about being in this on this team? Yeah. Even things like knowing what I asked, what leadership style do you thrive under? Because I'm going to supervise this new person. I want to know what here, in this case, it turned out to be he that I hired. What does he value? What does he need from me to make sure this is a good relationship? Yeah. Great question. Yes.
I have a really hard time coming up with examples to answer
Yeah.
questions in a specific way.
Yeah.
Are there, other than practicing beforehand, are there tips?
Yeah, there's a ton online, of course, if you want to, but you can always come in one-on-one with your career coach. We can go through the biggies, like the leadership, the getting along with someone who wasn't easy to get along with. There's some basics, behavioral-based questions that you're probably going to get, and we can help you brainstorm those. So what you don't want to do is not have an example at the ready. And if nothing else, today I think taught you that you can be more ready than you maybe thought you could be, and that you should be, and have a leadership one, a teamwork one, a communication one, a something went wrong example, a good 10 to 12 sort of examples at the ready. And you'll find the more you do this that they'll cross over. I go, oh, these guys are, because really what they're getting at some, and you'll see in the guide, they're getting at something, and we have that in the guide parenthetically. They're getting at what motivates you, what kind of leader are you, what role do you like to take on a team, and can it vary? Can you be a team lead one day and a support the next? Not everybody can do that.
I don't want to cut off questions, but I do want to take a moment for us to thank Donna. We're always looking for feedback from you about particular good sessions, so there are a couple boxes out there. One, those of you that know social media, this means, I like it, this means so if you have comments, please put them on the card, drop the card in the appropriate box. Thanks again, Donna.
Thanks so much.
Again, if you have other questions, we're not chasing you out of the room.
Yeah, please.